Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the first of this academic year's Engineers Ireland Academic Society events. As many of you spend enough time in lectures already, how we've decided to address the topic today of getting the most out of your lifelong learning is via a chat with Dr. Gillian Shorter. She's an esteemed psychologist, academic and researcher from Queen's University Belfast. So thank you for being with us, Gillian. My thanks to those of you who have already submitted questions, which I have here, and they're all prepared to go. But if anyone would like to ask a question of their own, please put it in the Q&A. And as we go along, I'll try and slip it into the conversation. I will do my very best to, but hopefully I won't be too distracted by what Gillian is saying to see those. So watch out for your question coming up. So look, let me introduce Gillian Shorter to you. So as well as being a reader in the School of Psychology in Queen's University Belfast, Gillian has also been competitively appointed as visiting professor at Tampere University in Finland and is a visiting researcher at Trinity College Dublin. She has conducted research into alcohol and other drug use for 20 years and is proud to be the course director of the MSc in Clinical Health Psychology at Queen's. Gillian's research aims to reduce stigma, empower change and promote social inclusion, and has been supported by over £6 million worth of research funding. Gillian is a mentor with Queen's Gender Initiative, and she supports her colleagues in their professional development. So as I say, very welcome, Gillian. We're delighted to have you. So I'm going to move straight into the questions, Gillian. It's because of your experience in supporting colleagues planning their professional development that we've invited you to share your expertise today. So let me start by asking, where should an academic get started in trying to address their need or desire for lifelong learning?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to come along. It's a real pleasure to be here and to hear your questions today. And I hope I can provide some useful insights to your members. This is always a really big one, but I think actually the answer is quite simple. And it's really just about thinking about who you are as a person. Like, what are your curiosity points? Where are your gaps in knowledge? What is relevant to your teaching, research, and career goals? And I think, I always recommend, there's one book I recommend nearly always, and some people that I have spoken to will know and have mentored will be very familiar with this book. And I actually brought a copy of it today. It's The Productive Researcher. And the reason I like this book is that in some of the early chapters, 2 or 3, they have a set of questions to help you understand yourself. So whenever you're an academic, you're teaching, there's research, there's admin, maybe you're working in industry as well. You're part-time in several different camps doing all sorts of things. And I think you can kind of lose yourself and why you're there and why you're interested in being an engineer and what problems you want to solve. So this book really encourages you to get back to that. Like, who are you? Why did you do a PhD in the first place? Why did you apply for your first job in engineering? I like this one actually, is if somebody asked you in an interview why you wanted the job, what would you actually say? Like, sometimes it's just, I need the money to pay the rent. And that's okay too, because it's knowing who you are and what you want. Why do you go after some collaborations and not others? And crucially, I think there's the joy question. Like, what gives you satisfaction at the end of a hard day? Or what problems do you want to solve? How do you want to contribute to the conversation? If you're sitting on a Monday, what makes you excited? What are you looking forward to in a week where you're excited for what comes next? And I think as academics or people in practice, we don't do enough introspection to work out who we are that then allows us to prioritize all the things that come after. So somebody goes, "Oh, hi, Gillian, I have this really exciting opportunity. Are you up for it?" My first answer is always yes, but it shouldn't be. And I go, well, that's not really within what I want to achieve in my work or the conversations I want to be having. So that makes it easier for me to say no to those opportunities or training opportunities and prioritize. And I think knowing who you are is the secret to your lifelong learning. What do you want to do? What do you want your work to achieve? Why do you even care? Like, you need to ask yourself those introspective questions, and then everything seems to follow a little bit easier after that.
That's really interesting. And I picked up on a word you used there, prioritize. So one of
Mhm.
our participants is asking, I'm interested in lots of things, but I know I need to be more strategic. Do you have some tips on how to prioritize?
Well, this is the problem. We're all super curious about a lot of things. Prioritization again works really well with sort of your long-term and short-term goals and keeping those quite fluid as well. So new opportunities will come up all the time and you can make these sort of 5-year plans, 10-year plans, all these great ideas that this is how it's all going to pan out. And then sort of you find yourself shifting a little bit with the wind. Again, this is why doing that sort of first exercise about who you are helps you keep a bit closer to it. But it's knowing your personal priorities is really, really essential to this, I think. Who are you? What do you want? And sort of kind of keeping that sort of idea of, what's of high interest and what might be of high value as well to your work or your employer. And trying to think through some of those things will help you do that prioritization work. But always come from that position of understanding what you want first. Because usually, even if your employer, whether that's a university or out in industry, wants something slightly different, quite often you can sort of tweak things or take certain parts of it and make it your own and make it interesting to you. And that helps you stay happy and healthy and well at work as well. And you feel like you're challenging yourself without overstretching.
That makes so much sense. I've also found sometimes by knowing what I want, it seems to appear more often. So that when it does appear, I can reach out and grab for it instead of having realized, oh gosh, that opportunity that came up 2 weeks ago, that's exactly the kind of thing I need. So yes, I really get where you're coming from there. But are there any tools or frameworks you mentioned having, planning? Are there any tools or frameworks that can help a participant on this in creating a long-term learning plan?
I think it's always a bit of a balance between a lot of things. Sometimes your employer, if you are an academic, for example, can be quite hands-off. Other times they like to be very much involved in things like your individual development plan. And the same can be true of industry, sort of your sort of line management and industry as well. So if you've got jobs that are balancing both, I think it's really you can work with your line manager with individual development plans, but again, I think it's always better if you kind of do the thinking yourself, maybe consult with some mentors, even consulting with people who are outside your institution so you can have quite frank conversations that can be off the record that don't affect your progression internally. And you can play with ideas a little bit more sometimes whenever you're doing with outside trusted folks as well. You can use tools like things like Trello, Notion. You can even go paper version if you wanted, like a nice, A2 piece of paper with some big markers of what you want or where you see your work going. And you can kind of use the tools that help you track things over time. I have a wall sort of schematic of all the different bits and pieces of work that I'm working on primarily as a visual reminder of how many things I need to be saying no to because there's no space in my workday. So it's kind of like this terrible looking spider diagram with legs going everywhere. And it kind of just reminds me to kind of focus a little bit more. And I have it in my office here at home. And I have a photocopy of a smaller version in my office at work. And I think those kind of things are helpful as your visual reminders, but play around with it. Like just because we're adults doesn't mean we can't get creative. If you're arty, lean into that. My spider diagram's not super arty, but there is color involved. It's probably the closest I get, but it's a little bit of playing around with it too, and it allows you to make it your own. So seek support, but don't be afraid, and the decisions really have to come from you, about what you want and where you want to go.
Yeah, and it's interesting, again, that you mentioned you might want to go to people other than your manager and that your manager may have
Yeah.
opinions questions, because another question from our audience is that professors seem to generally advise that you must go deep to get ahead, pick a really specific area. Do you think that you have to do this?
Oh, when you talked about this question, it really did make me think. And I think when some established professors now were getting their chair, I think it was very much true you had to specialize. I think in an era of things like AI, I think the secret sauce is in integration, in thinking broader, in taking paradigms from one area of engineering and marrying it with something else, taking a method from somewhere, and applying it in your area. I think there's a lot to be said for a little bit more breadth in what and a bit more width in what we know. I think it's very difficult to succeed and move from maybe those middle grades up into things like the professoriate and advance through the professoriate without a little bit more on the portfolio. And I think sometimes established professors have forgotten a little bit about how it is a little bit trickier to make the way up. And like I've made reader twice at two separate institutions. It is really difficult, I think, to get promoted. And I think we sometimes forget how difficult it is to get promoted when we're advising people. So I guess I think depth is crucial for academic credibility. You need to have a depth of knowledge. You need to have a solid knowledge base. But I don't think you can ignore sort of breadth and width here. And I think success going forward. And again, it might be different in psychology, public health, medicine, engineering, all these different sort of areas. But I think you need depth, but I think that breadth is necessary to sort of move up at the moment and sort of tap into some of the funding streams and things like that and investment. If that's, if you're looking for parallels with industry or bringing them into academic sort of settings, I think breadth allows you to adapt a little bit to sort of emerging opportunities and never closing yourself off with a particular funding stream or a particular line of inquiry or work. I just think I think you do need to be broader in the current climate to allow yourself room to succeed and maybe travel in several different directions. But it's good to get advice from a wide council. Like, go and speak to really established professors, hear what they've got to say, speak to people in the middle who are overworked and don't know what's going on. And it's like, don't ask me, I don't know. I'm just trying to survive. Ask people who are just coming up or just got promoted or whatever, and take a wide council of views and then decide how that fits with you, your values, and the sense of direction that you want to travel and see your work traveling in. So I think you do need to be a little bit broader maybe than some of our more senior academics are advertising at present.
And maybe, I mean, I fully get where you're coming from. Maybe the work you're doing is, your research itself will help you with the depth, and maybe that time you allot for lifelong learning might be for some of those associated skills.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Look, a follow on in there. What do you think are the most critical skills academics should focus on developing in today's rapidly changing environment?
Oh, this is a tricky one. I really do think a lot of it is things like digital literacy, particularly around things like AI prompting. So AI is only as good a tool as the prompts that you put into it, the data you're asking it to train on, and so on. And learning those little skills helps you use it more effectively going forward. I think, and I think the most successful individuals moving forward will learn and take a little bit of time to work out how to work with AI. I don't think it's going to replace us. I'm sorry. I don't
Yeah.
believe the hype. And I think without knowing how to use it effectively or having the knowledge base is really quite dangerous. So I think it's really important that we teach our students the importance of that knowledge base and doing the work in the first instance. But I also think adaptability, like it's much more of a personal, soft skill, but it's really essential. We are living in a rapidly changing world. There's so many different issues that are affecting um, the engineering field. We've got climate change, we've got funding, we've got even political things that are sort of affecting our landscape. And I think being adaptable is really, really essential. Another important skill, I think, is about equity and raising other people up, and bringing other people along with us, I think is really essential. And sort of understanding the diversity of populations and global populations and even within certain population groups, like things like neurodiversity, gender and breadth and gender, all those different things, and trying to understand some of those things allows us to take an extra breadth to our work as well. And it allows us really to sort of um, kind of to translate sort of the complex work that we're doing for different audiences to apply to broader sort of concepts, and to have more impact in the world. So I think that kind of curiosity and adaptability are really going to be super important as we sort of watch our world evolve, socially, politically, physically as well, and also the people within it.
Yeah, and it is. I mean, I would have been really disappointed, Gillian, if you'd only given us one critical skill. There
Oh
is
no,
that
not at
variety.
all.
Yeah, I particularly liked your piece about AI, because I was having a will we call it an argument? No, we'll call it a discussion with my 28-year-old daughter last night, where we were taking diametrically opposed views on the definition of something, and whether something was an example of this. So we both turned to Mr. Google and asked a question. And I got the answer back that no. And she got in the exact same time, got the answer back, yes. What was felt conspiracy theory like was I had been saying no and she had been saying yes. Okay. But the same AI summary to a very similar question asked came up with the two opposite answers. So being able to then have the discussion about, well, what did it really mean, was very interesting. Anyway, moving
So
on.
curious that that happened as well.
Yes, we did get into that bit of, was the phone listening to us before we put that in, because it was kind of interesting that we both got the answer we wanted. Okay,
Hmm.
but yeah,
Yeah.
very interesting. But it does mean you cannot trust AI. Okay, you have to be able to check its sources, etc., etc. So I
Yeah.
did find when I scrolled down further, I got the no answer as well. Okay, or the yes answer as well. So very interesting stuff. But look, there's, uh, I suppose, uh, a related question maybe is, you know, how can I, as a researcher, this came in from one of our audience, ensure continuous personal and professional development in this rapidly changing environment? So it's about being
Hmm.
able to stay current, that the training I did last week is still relevant, or what have you.
Yeah, it's really difficult. I'm not going to lie. You have to make the commitment for a start. You really want to be committing to that sort of cycle of sort of learning and sort of taking the time out to kind of reflect on where you're at or where your gaps are and being honest with yourself. Like you don't need to sit down and go to your boss, "Oh, I've got so many gaps, here they are," and lay out your entire stall of flaws for everyone to see. But I think a little bit of introspection is like, oh, I don't know about that. Is there somebody I can speak to about it that could fill that gap? Or is it something I need to learn myself? The other part is I think it's quite good to get out a little bit and like go to events like this, physical events, attend workshops, go to talks, even outside your field a little bit. You can always come and chat to any of us psychologists. We do get on quite well with engineers as well. So you're always welcome to come to any of our talks. But like just getting out sort of more broadly and sort of engaging with your peer networks. And I think this allows you kind of different perspectives, I think, as well. The last one I'm going to suggest is podcasts. I get a lot out of podcasts and I try and listen to quite a few different diverse ones. Even things like I'm quite partial to a comedy podcast. Now, I don't know necessarily if this is um, directly related to, tackling the problem of drug-related death or how to help support people who don't feel like treatment is for them. But I get a lot out of it because it's all about observation. And comedians are excellent at observing how we experience the world. So there's parts of it that I'm pulling into my day-to-day work without it necessarily being about drugs or alcohol or behavioral science or change or evolution or, sociology podcasts or public health or something just politics, self-help. I think sometimes just going for a walk, taking the dog out, and listening to sort of different perspectives makes different connections happen
Mhm.
that you might not have thought of as well, and helps you keep that broader perspective on the priorities that you've identified, right at the start of the conversation where we talked about thinking about you'll be percolating. Once you know what your priorities are, they'll continually percolate around in the back of your head,
Mhm.
coming to the fore. And you were saying there, when opportunities present themselves, when you know what you're looking for, they appear. And the same will be true when you identify your priorities of where you see your work going, how you see it as having a conversation with the wider body of engineering, or if you do cross-disciplinary work with the other disciplines that you work with. And I think that should really, really help with your sort of adaptation to that changing environment. But it is tricky, and there's no right path for any of us, really. It's just about trying to sort of not burn out and make sure we put limits on ourselves. Particularly if we are very curious, we can get a bit excited and head down rabbit holes that maybe we shouldn't.
I love that. Yeah, but I think yeah, I think you're right. Podcasts and comedy shows and things like that. They're a way of stimulating different parts of your consciousness and subconsciousness. And I'm also a firm believer that there's no such thing as wasted education. So
No.
I may go on a training program now and think, God, I'm not going to get to apply any of that, but it's still something that's in there to be percolated and maybe brought out by some comment a comedian makes in his monologue or whatever. Um,
And I think just on that as well. So one of the things I've had a couple of people that I've mentored through the years who've struggled with public speaking. And one of the things I would suggest is an improv class, so improvisation comedy, where you're being trained to say yes, and then but in kind of interesting ways, and you're prompted and things like that. And the success that I know a lot of people have had with that, um, it's been quite something. And I think, sometimes that separation, that church and state separation of the arts and sciences, get
mhm,
involved. Art is at the foundation of everything. Artists told us how science worked long before we even did any of the experiments or
mhm,
the mathematics behind it. Artists were telling us how we perceive the world, how our eyes work, how, we conceptualize things, how things should be structured. They've been doing this for years, and it's, when we try and sort of embrace that complexity of different perspectives, I think there's a certain amount of magic that happens there, and I'm a firm believer in like sort of supporting the arts, paying for the arts, paying artists
mhm,
properly, and really seeing it as an adjunct to a better life. Which I consider myself a scientist, of course, but embracing the arts is really a really fantastic thing to be doing. And of course, all artists should be paid fairly.
Very well said. And I would also put it that every academic researcher who is looking to find new ways of doing something, who wants to be inventive, is being creative
Yeah,
and artistic in a way. Quite often, the art is in asking the question in the first place, isn't it?
absolutely.
And then and imagining, well, surely it should be something like this. Now I'm going to go off and get the scientific backing to get there. Um, look, we've talked about lots of things, but if we talk a bit maybe about the ways to learn, and there's lots of different ways to learn, and the latest buzzword seems to be micro credentials. There's micro credentials for everything. How do micro credentials differ from traditional qualifications, and what value do they add for a participant, in your opinion?
So I agree, buzzword. It is everywhere. Everything's a micro credential these days. And I would very much agree with that. And they're, at least in my understanding, they're kind of short, focus certification that is a very specific on some very specific skills. When we talked about AI back there, I think, one of the things I'm really saying to students is like, I can use AI because when AI tells me something in my field, I'm like, that's complete nonsense. I've seen it hallucinate references that sound plausibly, like I was going, oh, I have worked with that person. Did they publish something without running it past me first? And that was literally my thought process. But I know the work that I've produced, and so you're kind of like, that's a very basic example of, that kind of checking. And I say to students, the joy of being a university is the learning. So you can get it AI to do a podcast even of the recommended reading, but you don't know whether it's interpreted those papers correctly. You're just absorbing that information, and that's nice, but um, you're not really engaging with it so that it becomes part of your knowledge base. And that's where I think traditional qualifications like a BSc, an MSc, an MEng,
Mhm.
trying to get your credentials correctly. Please stop me if I get it wrong. Um, so once you're doing those master's courses, those bachelor's courses, your PhD or whatever, it's kind of a broad base that you're getting. So you're getting the foundational knowledge that allows you to interact with AI in a meaningful way where you can go, something doesn't seem right there. That doesn't marry with what I know. And even if you don't know instantaneously if it's correct, there's something about it that doesn't seem right, and you have the skills and the tools to go and investigate it further. I think for our graduates, we have to really stress that bottom knowledge base, and it's really essential. And although AI can do a lot of it for us, it is essentially just a plagiarism machine. It's pulling out what we already know. And we want our graduates for the future and us as graduates to be able to do the complex integration stuff, the things that AI can't do,
Mhm.
the connections it can't make, the creativity it can't make. And I think that's where we're bringing all that lifelong learning, which can be micro credentials or other degrees. But I think it's going to be really, really important to kind of keep that progression going. You want to keep yourself interested in your field, and to kind of stress yourself a little bit in a good way, in sort of small directions, that help you think about things a little bit differently and just give you extra strings.
So micro credentials are to fill little bits that maybe weren't in your primary degree, either because they didn't exist when you did it, like almost everything digital with me now,
Yeah.
or because it's something you need for your for the breadth of your role as opposed to the depth of
Yeah.
your role.
And I
Yeah.
think you can come across random problems that you just don't know how to solve. And so
Mhm.
micro credentials can be really good, or you need to learn a particular technique or something that's quite novel or new or emerging. And I think they can be really, really helpful, just to kind of stretch yourself in that direction and fill that gap. You can always bring other people into the team that you work with, from outside or whatever, but sometimes there's a bit of joy in just knowing you can do it yourself.
Yeah. And it's funny, as you're saying, that it wasn't called a micro credential in its day, but
It's
I
probably
did
something boring, like a short course or
I
something.
did a short course in the use of Excel, and it enabled me to do really fun data analytics before data analytics was a phrase. So yes, I see where you're coming from.
And
Um,
sometimes you don't even know there's certain things that you can do until you've done it. And then it's like, oh, that's opened an extra wee door for me. So,
yeah.
it can be
Mhm.
really good for that perspective.
But and maybe this kind of naturally falls on that this whole concept of digital literacy.
Yeah.
So like on the one hand, possibly what a lot of us need to do is to have our micro credentials or training be in the area of digital literacy. But the other is like, is there a way that we can use digital to support our lifelong learning, do you think?
I think there's lots of different new tools out there, that we can use in the digital realm that are designed to help us be more efficient, develop our skills, keep a record of all of our skills. I guess the danger sometimes with digital literacy is everything's very shiny, and everything's very important. But a lot of the digital tools take extra time. So if you decide, for example, you're using one platform to organize your projects, and maybe you've got a complex project that you're doing, and then you don't like the look of it anymore, or it doesn't have a functionality, then you've got to swap everything onto something else, or you're working with an international team and they're doing something else. And I think it's really important to have digital literacy and to try and keep your skills up to date in that area. But I think, we're being told all the time that everything is essential. Like AI is essential. We need 20 different types of AI for different kinds of things. And, I think sometimes we get kind of caught up in the bubble of productivity. And sometimes we can it can take up more time than we had already anticipated spending on something. So I think digital literacy, yes, essential, particularly learning those AI skills, learn how to prompt, learn where to look for your sources that you're drawing upon to get the answer. But don't believe all the hype either about AI. Same for productivity tools, same for all these other things that are going to revolutionize our lives. Just be careful not to fall into that productivity trap where um, the search for efficiency makes you less efficient. I
I've
say that
definitely
because
thought,
I have fallen into that trap.
and I
So,
was about to say
you
I've been
know,
in that trap a few times as well. Look, we've been talking a lot about all the huge variety of things, and there's lots of things you've been talking about. But look, many people are already stretched. They're juggling the various aspects of their career, their family life. Can you advise on some effective methods for integrating lifelong learning into an already full academic schedule?
well, the prioritization bit is the most important element, I think, of that. So, doing the work that I talked about when we answered the first question about who you are, what you want is essential. Um, Once you do that, then you get a sense of where the gaps are, what it is that you want, and then you're going to look to try and find nuggets of time that fit around that. I think small nuggets of time work best for me. I'm in that weird mid-career bit where you're expected to lead. You're, you've got loads of admin responsibilities. You've got students, you've got PhD students, you've got postdocs, you've got external collaborators, you've got grants. Some of them are going really well, some of them aren't as well. You know what I mean? So there's all sorts of different things. And I'm a big fan of sort of small, kind of consistent windows of time. If you can try and carve that out. And I would say that you do need to be carving something out per week that's you time. It doesn't have to be used for training necessarily, but I think something that allows you to plan your week, plan your month, plan your year, to reflect, to train. It sort of depends on what training you need. So sometimes if it's a week residential, then you have to make that space happen. Or if it's something that that's own pace, then you can take what I'm going to sound very Northern Irish at this point when I say power hour. POWERHOUR. I just can't say those words with all the letters in there with my Northern Irish accent. So I'm a big fan of a power hour when I need things done. And I would use that for various different purposes, but this could be for your own lifelong learning. If there's something that you need to get completed, it can be quite helpful to do that. For me, mornings work best. For some people, afternoons, evenings, knowing your sort of mood and your general schedule and where your pinch points are with energy can be really, really helpful. So for me, I work best and most creatively in the mornings. Other people don't exist till 1 o'clock, even though they're physically present. So working with yourself and your own rhythms, I think, is really important as well.
Yeah, I think they've coined it as a learning hour in our place, but I prefer power hour. Like it's something.
Yeah.
It's going to
Plus,
be
you can
something
always mock
powerful.
your favorite Northern Irish person when you're doing it as well. So, you've got the added comedy element too.
Absolutely,
Oh, it's
absolutely.
good to
But
laugh at work.
yeah, but that kind of brings you on to like so. And the reason I like the term power hour that you've just is that it's something powerful.
Yeah.
But how do have you any ideas how we sort of measure? Um, is our investment in learning paying off?
Yeah.
Um,
I think it's about the conversation that you're having. So if you find yourself unable to integrate what you're doing into the conversation about your work, and by that I mean like I always see like papers and grants as contributing to the conversation in our wider field, whether that's, psychology, public health, engineering, medicine, whatever it is. How, like, what are you trying to do? What's your part of the dialogue in the conversation that is engineering? And if you find that you can't find the learning integrating with the conversation that you're trying to have about the work that you're doing, then I think it's time to take a step back and asking yourself, well, you could just be doing it for fun. You could be. And that's also fine. We need to have enjoyment, and work is not everything. But it's kind of like the story you're telling, or imagine you've got a boss who's really overpowering, is like, I want a business case for this and everything else. If you can't make the kind of business case, I prefer a conversation, but I'm a psychologist. Business case works for you, work with that. But if you're not able to kind of make that business case for the continued investment in that, whether it's not giving you pleasure, it's not improving anything, you're not getting more efficient, your expertise isn't deepening, new opportunities aren't making themselves available. It's kind of reflecting regularly on whether it's translating into something meaningful. And we all know what the indicators are from an academic perspective, publications, your teaching quality, your collaborations, your grants, your partnerships with industry. These are other ways that you can kind of confirm the value over and above the I'm still able to integrate this into the conversation of what I do. So it's kind of just reflecting on that a little bit about whether it's really contributing to what it is that you want to achieve with your work.
Yeah, look, I think that's really sound advice there, and asking for feedback is quite often the best way, isn't it? I'm having a little bit of technical difficulty here, so I'm going to have to go off screen, but I will still be listening. And while I'm off screen, I'm going to ask you to answer the question, what role, if any, can coaching or mentoring provide in a person's lifelong learning journey?
I'm a big fan of coaching and mentoring. I have had several incredible mentors in my life, and I engage the services of a coach um, that I currently work with, and I find them really helpful. For me, mentoring is more kind of like a sounding board, someone to play around with, someone to try and understand some of the unwritten rules. Coaching, I find slightly different and a little bit more structured. For me, I think it's been quite helpful to understand some of the rules of the game of academia. I think coaching can be a little bit more, it's almost a little bit more sort of self-directed, where you're going, well, here's how I want to go, and the coach can kind of help you work out the plan of how to get there. And I think both can be really helpful. Mentors tend to be inside and outside institutions. Again, I think it's nice to have mentors inside the institution, but you need to have a really strong kind of sense of trust between the two of you, that it remains sort of a confidential conversation. For that reason, it can be sometimes slightly more helpful to play around with mentors outside of the institution, so you can get a broader perspective that you can bring back to your home institution. And I think sometimes, if your work does a lot of crossover with industry, having an industry critical friend or mentor can be incredibly essential to sort of help you bridge the gap between academic and industry partnerships. If you're looking to move more into the partnerships with industry, and I know this is something engineering excel at, again, there are coaches that can help you identify leads and capitalize on those leads and partnerships. So those are other ways that and you can get coaching for things like grant writing and all sorts of different aspects of work as well. So I think it's just about thinking what it is that you need and who might be able to provide it. And sometimes it's just reaching out and going, look, could we just have a chat? Coaching tends to be more formal and you usually pay for it, but mentoring tends to be something informal and unpaid. Um, Although sometimes coffee is used as a substitute payment, which is always highly valued as a currency.
Yeah, look, Thank you. And I've got my technical issues kind of sorted, hopefully. We'll
Brilliant.
see if they'll last to the end. Now look, so I think there are stages in your career as well when what you don't need another training program. You need somebody who can actually help you work out what you've learned and how to use it. And both coaching
Yes,
and mentoring can be used in that
absolutely.
way.
Yeah.
So anytime I'm being coached or mentored or providing it, because as a coach or a mentor, you get lots out of the thing.
Oh, I
I
know.
actually count that as continuous professional development, and it is absolutely sometimes the best advice you get for yourself is hearing yourself advise somebody else. you know, but look,
Sometimes you can even hear how ridiculous it sounds when it comes out of you. You're like, oh,
yes,
actually, no,
yeah,
I don't think that's right. And it's
yes.
okay to be wrong, of course, as well.
Yeah, and it's when you find yourself advising somebody and you're thinking, do as I say, not as I do, and
Oh,
maybe
yeah.
maybe I
Yeah.
should start doing that too. Yes,
Productivity tools. I
yes.
went through a phase where I was trying them all out and got nothing done. Nothing. Until I had a word with myself. I was like, no, 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 this has to stop. We have lost the run of ourselves.
Hmm. Yeah. Look, a couple of maybe related questions in this whole lots, that productivity piece and that kind of thing is, um, how can one avoid learning fatigue while still staying up to date in your field? How can participants in a learning thing stay motivated to continue learning over the course of their careers?
Yeah, gosh, this is a good one. I think it's always important to remember that your career tends to be quite long. Unfortunately, we can't retire very early these days. So, knowing you've got a lot of time at work and that, you know, your entire work career will have rhythms. So perhaps you might be parenting and raising a child. You might have times when you have outside responsibilities, an unwell parent, a sick dog, all sorts of different things come up in your life. And there may just be times where you're just not super productive or, um, you know, well, you'll have years where you're absolutely knocking it out of the park and years where not an awful lot gets done. And it's important to work with those rhythms because to fight them creates more drama for yourself and reduces
Mhm.
your ability and resource. And I see this a lot in sort of people who are neurodivergent as well. A lot of the time um, actually a lot of people who get diagnosed very late in life as well have spent most of their work lives thinking they're terrible and they're not cut out for the world of work. And it becomes a surprise when they realize that just work sometimes isn't compatible with a neurodivergent brain. And the expectation is that people behave in a neurotypical fashion. And so there can be some issues there to manage in terms of, your energy and processing all of those different things. And I think it's really important just to be kind to yourself with all of those things. And I specifically mention neurodivergence because, it's something that has come up in my work life fairly recently. And it's just really clear to see how not realizing you're neurodivergent earlier and getting the support that you need has affected your rhythms your entire life. And there's so much more that changes when that that's who you are and that there's nothing wrong with you essentially, but you just see the world and process it differently. For neurotypical people, there's so many other things as well that could happen. And it's just so important that whatever it is that you're doing, that you're kind to yourself, that you pace yourself, um, and keep it interesting. I think, I talked about that prioritization exercise. But as you go through your life, what I was interested in when I started my career has evolved several times over, in a 20-year career, and sort of allowing that evolution to happen, ideally without judgment and with kindness to yourself as well, too, I think helps you work with your energy and work with your motivation. Um, and crucially allows you to stay well. Do not burn yourself out. It's not worth it. And burnout can sometimes be a product of your environment, not just about your workload. So, it's important to work with yourself, work with the circumstances that you're in, work with the mind and body that you have, um, and prioritize your health above everything else. You can be replaced in the morning. Um, your work besties will miss you very much. Your colleagues will miss you for a little while, but you people who love you will
Mhm.
miss you, and that's really, really essential.
Yeah, look, I couldn't disagree with any of that. Look, we're coming up on time, but I'm going to try and fit in a couple more questions. So, first of all, what role do you think reflective practice plays in sustaining lifelong learning? So we're doing all this learning, but is there a role for reflective practice as well?
I think it's quite important. And I think when you were talking about coaching there earlier, we were talking about getting a coach involved, and that can be really helpful because you want to move from just getting and obtaining the knowledge to kind of making it actionable, and creating new insights that then you can apply. So I think you can constantly be getting inputs, but unless you stop and process the inputs, I think sometimes you miss the opportunity to integrate it with what you know, and sort of find ways to bring it into action, find ways to see whether it's fitting in with the conversation that you want to have, and the wider contribution you want to make to engineering. And I think just that reflective practice is essential, just to stop you as well as I did, spending months looking at different productivity apps and realizing that none of them are as productive as a paper diary and a really nice pen.
Yes, yeah, and so often I've found that doing a little reflection at the end of a week or a month can actually tell me I've learned an awful lot more than I thought. Because there was some particular problem I had to deal with, and I actually went off and found new ways of approaching it or what have you. But look, I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to ask you a final question. If instead of all the great advice you've already offered us, you could only make one suggestion as to how we get the most out of lifelong learning, what would that one suggestion be?
My favorite thing that I love to talk about at the moment is curiosity. If nothing else, cultivate curiosity. Make it a habit that you ask questions and seek answers. When somebody that you're managing is having a difficult time or is misbehaving or whatever, be curious. Like, you're not performing as you normally do. Why is that? What's going on for you? Curiosity is such an important part of our work lives, and I don't see it enough in academic life. And I think it helps us stay happy, stay well, stay friends with our colleagues, keeps our employees on side. It helps us learn and grow. It helps us see avenues for future learning. And it sort of helps improve all aspects of our work life, from the interactions we have with others, to how we share our knowledge and lifelong learning. And so, if I had to give one piece of advice, it's to stay curious. And it's hard when you're tired and life is in the way and different things are going on, and it's hard to balance all the things, and there's never enough hours in the day. But just stay curious about how you can find space, or what you could drop, or what gaps you could fill, or is there actually an efficiency that you could use, that might help you move your work forward. But I think curiosity is an essential skill, and I'd like to see more of it in the academy. Um,
Yeah.
so hopefully
So,
that helps.
so keep exercising your curiosity. I'm going to be really naughty and sneak in one last question that's come in the Q&A.
Oh,
This one says, I've done many short upskilling courses, but can't implement them or use them in the workplace. Most of the managers even don't know them and are not open for new ideas and learnings. Do you think I've wasted my time?
no, no, definitely not. Because you've been curious. You've got a couple options there. So you could, sometimes managers aren't always interested in evolution. Sometimes they are. Sometimes it's a framing issue. Maybe if you can frame it as saving time, saving energy, creating more space for something else, what benefits they would have for them, they might come around. Sometimes they just won't. But if it helped you with your conversation, it helped you know more, it helped you evolve, I think that's a win. That's a win to me. And you are to be commended for continuing to want to improve yourself, even if your environment isn't saying we're fully behind you. So well done. It's only going to make you stronger and better at your job, even if they don't let you implement it. I think it's wonderful that you're curious, and I hope you don't let other people's lack of enthusiasm for your curiosity and hard work stop you from taking the steps to go where you want to go.
Perfect. That's exactly the kind of thing I'd have said. And one of the things I'd say as well is bide your time, because a time will come when you will get to apply that. And in fact, knowing that knowledge may enable you again to pull it out at the right time in the conversation. And so don't take no for an answer. Sometimes the answer will come later. Look, thank you so much, Gillian. It's been really insightful, and I hope our audience has found it as interesting as I have. But look, everybody, that is the end of our webinar on getting the most out of your lifelong learning. I hope you found it useful and interesting.